and I realized that I was muted. um, I'm glad I caught that, because if I could make this entire video and have not noticed that, that would have been a disaster. Thankfully, I noticed it 2 minutes in. Hopefully, you can hear me now. In fact, I might just hop over real quick to the channel just to make sure my sound is coming through. Okay, the sound is coming through. We're good to go. Like I was saying, if you watch this channel, congratulations on stumbling upon it somehow. But I'm excited that you're somehow here, and that you're somehow watching. But if you watch this channel, if you've known anything about this channel, you know that I published a update video, I think maybe a week or two ago, and I sort of talked about major changes that were coming to the channel, changing the name, changing the vibe, changing the structure, more so to reflect the nature of the kind of videos that I enjoy making and putting my heart into. And I hadn't mentioned any live streams, and that was because I was still considering my options at the time, and I hadn't really considered what I was going to do, if I was even going to do a live stream. And ultimately I decided on doing a live stream. And if you know anything about our channel and live streams, you know that we're kind of 0 for 3. So I think the first live stream that I had tried to do was just eating lunch, and I would just have a live stream and eat lunch and kind of invite people to just conversations. That didn't really take off very, very well. Another one that didn't really take off was the Nightly Nugget, which is a live stream that I had started with Nate. We actually both really enjoyed that one, but we both found it, again, it didn't really take off as we had hoped. And then Q&A nights, that was another one that I had started. And there was a couple of nights that were successful, but nothing, again, nothing really took off. So if you're watching this, somehow it has to be divine providence, because there's no other way you could have found this channel, because it's very obscure, and you're probably one among two at most. So like I said, we're 0-3 for live streams. But the reason I decided I still wanted to give a go at another live stream is because if you remember the video I published talking about the channel at large, the videos that we'll be producing moving forward are going to be a little different from videos we've done in the past, although I would say watch the Liminal Spaces video. It's probably more similar to that one. There's just going to be more time, more energy, more love, and commitment towards quality over quantity. And I talk a little bit more about that in the update video, so go ahead and watch that. But what that means is that videos are going to be less frequent. They're not going to be every week. They might be once a month. And at least that's the hope. So I decided, well, I should have something to kind of fill that gap in. And so I just said, I'm just going to think of the first thought, whatever thought I think of, I'm just going to start it. I'm just going to do it. And if I am 0 for 4, then I'll try again and I'll be 0 for 5. And I might be 0 for 10 or 0 for 20 down the road, but at least I will have tried. And I think that is oddly more inspiring to me than not trying, which I feel like is a very like obvious conclusion. Anyway, this show, the attempt number 4 is called Adam Answers Anything. Adam Answers Anything. The only reason it's named that is because I like alliteration. It's not named that because I think I know everything. That is absolutely true. I do not know everything. However, I'm willing to try and answer anything. And so if you know the channel is I would say philosophy niche, but not academic philosophy. It's more of practical philosophy, just how to live, how to think, and how to see the world differently, perhaps, than you may have seen it. And so I love deep questions. I love diving into aspects of life that we may have never thought to even dive into before. So Adam Answers Anything just comes from a desire to connect with people, a desire to meet people where they're at, and to just think through life with them. So if you notice, there is a QR code in the corner of the screen. If you scan that QR code, you'll be taken to a Google form where you can submit a question. Write the question, and then your display name, so the name that I'll kind of shout out when I read the question, and then your email address. And so that's going to be up every single live stream, every single week, and anyone at any time can just scan it and ask their question, and I will try to make a list of questions that I'll work through with as questions are submitted, and I'll use the display name, username to kind of say who asked the question, and then they'll be on the show. So like I said, because we're 0 for 4 with live streams, I want to. I don't want to say I have low expectations, because that's not true. I definitely don't have great expectations, because that's a boring book. But I would say I have just expectations that I'm doing something, and if I get no questions in the span of a month, that's fine. I'll just enjoy talking to myself about questions that I find on the internet. And I already do that. So, hey, anyway, so that's what Adam Answers Anything is, and I'm going to try and do it on a weekly basis. This is kind of the pilot run, so it's not going to be super long, and it's also not always going to be at this time. I'm only doing it at this time because it's been a while since I published that video, and I just want to keep life flowing through the channel so that it doesn't feel stagnant for such a long period of time. And that is actually less about the algorithm, and it really is more about just me personally, because I don't want to be in a position where nothing's been on the channel for 3 months and then I've lost all inspiration or passion for it. But if I am doing something on a regular basis, then I know myself that the passion will still be there. But anyway, so that's what you're watching. And if you happen to be watching right now, I'm surprised, but I'm also thankful that you're here. Just a huge disclaimer. I know nothing, but I'm willing to answer anything. So I'm going to answer questions in the way that I would answer them, from my perspective and from my heart. And I'm not always going to be able to satisfy every question, but I love giving it an attempt. So that's where we're at. So I'm actually just going to briefly introduce our first question. And so a lot of the questions I have at the beginning, they actually are questions that I found in forums, in chats and stuff like that, in like philosophy groups. They're questions that I've seen in other places, people wrestling and grappling with them. And so I made a list of those questions to work through first. And if anyone happens to watch this video and submits a question, then I'll kind of put that question at the front of the line. So real quick, first question. Oh, and by the way, all the questions I have are kind of like philosophical life questions, but you can ask a question about anything. I will answer it as long as it's not incredibly offensive or inappropriate. I will answer the questions. So the first question of the show is it better to know painful truths or live happily in ignorant? I can't say that word. Ignorance. Is it better to know painful truths or live happily in ignorance? That's the question for today. And I've thought about this question, or as I was thinking about the question, my first thought was, it's kind of a difficult question because it's not a really defined question. And what I mean by that is, what is it that we mean when we talk about painful? What do we mean when we talk about happy? And also, what kinds of truths are we talking about? What kinds of painful truths? And when we say happily in ignorance, do we mean like utopic bliss, or do we mean just not knowing that a thing had occurred or that a thing exists? And it's a difficult question because fundamentally it's almost a incorrect question, I should say, because there are painful truths that are inescapable. And for example, one of those painful truths is our own mortality. The fact that I am going to die someday is not a truth that if I had been sheltered enough, I never would have discovered. It's a truth that's inevitable for me to discover. I can't really imagine someone living their entire lives not realizing that they're going to die someday. It's essentially impossible. And death, I think it could be argued, is one of those truths that is inescapable to know. And I feel like the most painful truths revolve around death. The death of someone that you love, the death of your hopes and dreams, the death of your career, and your death, ultimately. And what's interesting, the more I thought about this, and by the way, I want to answer this question in two different ways. The first way that I want to answer this question is thinking about it as abstractly and objectively as I possibly can. And then the second way I want to answer the question is, I want to answer the question as a Christian, because I am a Christian. I have a Christian worldview. And ultimately, fundamentally, I should say, at the very foundation, your worldview is going to determine how you answer this question. Not just how you answer it, but it's going to determine how you think about the very question itself. And so I want to try and do those two aspects of it. But the more that I thought about how there are inescapable truths like death, the more I realized that death is actually one of those inescapable, painful truths that often pushes us to achieve things in our lives that either bring us joy or bring, more importantly, other people joy. And that happiness is often not a result of not knowing painful things, but a result of knowing which things are good. Let me try and explain that. The only way that I can know what a happy life looks like is if I know what a painful one looks like. And so the inescapable reality of having to be confronted with my own mortality and the mortality of those that I love is almost a necessity for me to, by contrast, have an understanding and perspective on what it is that is happy, joy-filled, loving life. And so it's a good question, but it's similar to the question of if what happens when an immovable object meets an irresistible force, right? Philosophy 101. It's similar to that question in the sense that the reason that question is a logical incoherence is because if there is a universe in which there exists an immovable object, that means there cannot be an irresistible force coexisting in that universe, or else that would no longer be an immovable object, and vice versa. There can't be a universe in which exists an irresistible force if there is also an immovable object, because therefore that force would no longer be irresistible. It's almost in the sense that there can't necessarily be a universe in which there are no experience of painful truths and living in happiness and joy and peace, while at the same time coexisting, if that makes sense. It's almost like they're inconsistent. And so I might think that, well, what if we're just talking about, like, what if we just accept that as, okay, well, let's just accept that, like, death and mortality, that's kind of the obvious, but beyond that, right? So beyond the foundational painful truths that we all know and live with. For example, like, let's say a hurricane happened and several hundred people lost their lives in Florida or something, or just pick any a number of event that's actually occurred in real life in the past several months. You could also ask the question, if I didn't know those truths, like, we could define those as painful truths that I didn't necessarily have to know. Is it better for me not to know them? Well, in a sense, yes. Because as I was thinking about this, I was thinking about when I was a kid. And I was a kid in the 90s, and then a kid and a teenager in the early 2000s. And it was unheard of to be constantly bombarded with every single natural disaster, every single event where there was a loss of human life. It was unheard of. Now, I realize that some of that does have to do with the fact that I was a kid, that I was growing up. But outside of that, beyond that, it was really only the big tragedies that you would hear about on the news, even on the local news. Like, you wouldn't hear about every single death or every single tragedy that occurred in your local, just wherever you lived. You wouldn't really hear about all of them. You'd hear about some of them. And if you read the newspaper and whatnot, you'd hear about even more of them. But living in a social media, technological age where we are so hyper connected that every single event doesn't just have one perspective, but it has hundreds of perspectives as people take out their phones and inevitably record. It is impossible to live in a hyper connected digital age and not be exposed to every single tragic event that occurs in our world. And so I suppose that one way you could look at the question is by saying, yeah, it's not that it's not that in the 90s we just were immune to or didn't care about or ignored these tragic events. I guess I'd say generally we didn't ignore the fact that they're happening or that they're painful. It was that we only gave mind to those events which were right in front of us because they're the ones that we could see. I mean, we weren't hyper connected to a digital age yet. And so we weren't exposed to everything all at once, all at the same time, everywhere. And I'd be interested to see, what studies there are that have maybe mapped what kind of effect that has had on us as a society, because there have been countless studies that have shown how social media in general has affected the human brain and how it has affected our lives and our sociability as a culture. But I wonder if there's a study on how our constant exposure to tragedy has changed us as a culture? Has it changed the way that we think? Obviously, anything that I say further is mostly just speculation, but one possibility that comes to mind is I wonder if there's a correlation between the degree to which we are exposed to tragedy in the world and the degree to which we are more divided and we have more hatred for one another. And I say that because it's almost like there's so much tragedy in the world, but every time there's a tragedy, there's immediately blame put on this person or that person, this policy or that policy, this agency or that agency. It's put on somebody. And then these people have a hatred for those people because of this event. And when that's happening on a daily basis, because we're constantly being exposed to heartbreaking tragedy, well, then that would naturally create more hatred and vitriol for one another as our exposure to things like that naturally grows, and as we naturally start blame shifting for whatever event might be occurring. That's a possibility. There's obviously no evidence for that, but like I said, I'd be curious if there really is evidence. But that is a way that we could look at the question, is not necessarily painful truths in the sense of anything that's painful, but painful truths in the sense of something that's painful that I didn't really need to know. And I would say in a lot of ways, it's probably better not to know about those. And let me just clarify that. Not necessarily that I'm ignorant of truths. So for example, if we were to talk about, like, if you were living in the 50s or 60s or something like that, and you were ignorant of social injustices that were occurring around you, cultural attitudes towards certain minority groups, you could be ignorant to those and just live in happy ignorance, but you should still be informed of the cultural attitudes that are going on around you. Absolutely. I think it's important that we know where injustice is occurring, that we can have an effectual difference in, if that makes sense. So I might not have the immediate ability to curb injustice in sub-Saharan Africa, for example. But if there is an injustice in the state of Michigan, well, that might be a more relevant truth for me to know, because I might be able to do something about it. So there's different ways that you can answer the question. Now, as a Christian, I would answer the question this way. Yes. Or sorry, as a Christian, I would answer the question this way. It's better to know painful truths. And here's why. The first step into solving any problem is realizing that there is one. And the first step into realizing that you need someone to save you is when you realize that you need to be saved from something. And the first painful truth that we are exposed to is that we live in a broken, fallen, sinful, painful world. And it's not just the world that's broken. It's us that's broken. That is perhaps one of the most painful truths that we could learn in our life. But it's a necessary one, because without learning that truth, we'll never feel or think or realize that, well, we need someone to save us from this death, from this pain. We need someone to save us from this truth. For the wages of sin is death, Paul writes. And even Mary, the mother of Jesus, recognized that she needed a savior. David needed a savior. Pick any flavor of writer, Solomon, Jeremiah, Isaiah, recognized there was the need for a savior. In fact, a savior was promised in Genesis chapter 3 in the very beginning. And I will put enmity between you. And Um, so as a Christian, I would say, absolutely, you have to recognize that painful truth, because if you don't, you'll never recognize your need. That it's only through Jesus that we can live in joy and peace. It's only through Jesus that we can bear the painful truths that we've learned and live through them and be used of Him by His power and His strength. In fact, the most painful event is the only way through which we can have victory over the painful truth in our life. And that most painful event was when the Father turned His face away from the Son. And I won't get into theology right now about why that was the most painful event. But a perfect being turned His face away from His Son, all so that we didn't have to live under the weight and pressure of these painful truths, or the painful truth, which is death. So, as a Christian, I'd say it's better to know the painful truth and hope and pray that that painful truth for you guides you to realize that we need saving and that we can't save ourselves. And people have been trying to do it for centuries. And that through Christ, we have freedom from the pain of our lives. And it doesn't mean that pain stops, because it doesn't. It really doesn't. But it does mean that we can bear it. It does mean that we can come out of the end of the storm stronger than we were before. It means that we have a hope of life, that we can be happy, but it doesn't have to be in ignorance. That our happiness and joy doesn't have to be ignorant, it doesn't have to be fake or false, built on just not knowing and ignoring certain things. It can be built on a true, genuine hope. You know, I had said that the way you answer this question depends on your worldview, and it really does. Because if I look at the world with a skeptical, cynical, secular, humanistic mindset, the painful truth of death is inescapable. And that ignorance or just indifference is the only way to really live your life. You have to ignore the question. You have to ignore the pain. You have to either pretend that it doesn't exist, or you have to pretend that it just doesn't involve you. And that in and of itself is a painful way to live. And happiness or joy or whatever it might be is just fleeting. True. I mean, I don't want to say that you can't be happy, but it's only through Jesus that we can have true joy and true happiness for the rest of our lives. And if you want to know more about that, please reach out. Send a question. It's over there. Send a question. Talk to me. Ask me. And I'd love to hear from you. So that was our first question of Adam Answers Anything. Like I said, if you somehow stumbled upon this, congratulations, you have stumbled upon the rabbit hole and somehow ended up here. But if you have, and you liked it, and you enjoyed listening, please give it a like, and please join us next time, whenever that will be. I will try and schedule these things ahead of time, so be sure to be subscribed, so that I could schedule it ahead of time so that you can see that the live stream is going to be playing soon. Thank you. I hope everyone has a wonderful night, and if you like the show, give it a thumbs up, and I will catch you guys on the flip side.